a hand with needle marks pressed into the keyboard. The hospital monitor blinked a steady heartbeat behind the laptop screen. On her left wrist, a plastic bracelet, Odette Marlowe, 74, room 412, alone. She opened the Excel file. 14 rows, each one an account. First column TOD, second column being filled now, one cell at a time, one row at a time, no hurry, only precision removed. Her son had visited 11 minutes on Monday morning. He said, "Mom, I'm taking the cruise next week with Clara, but you'll be fine, you're always fine." Then he walked out with his Bon Voyage card and the tan he hadn't earned yet. She waited for the door to close. Then she opened the laptop. At the airport, Todd and Clara were laughing, pulling luggage through the boarding gate. In room 412, Odette was on the phone. She said, "Grant, I need you to draft the paperwork, all of it." Grant said, "Todd." She said, "Every account, everything with his name on it. I want it finished before his plane lands." The monitor blinked. Her fingers continued typing. She had 7 days, and she knew exactly what she was doing. The removed column. Todd arrived at 9:15 on Monday morning. He came through the door of room 412 with a takeaway coffee in one hand and his phone already vibrating in the other, and he sat down in the chair beside his mother's bed with the particular quality of a man who has decided to be present and is finding the being present more difficult than the deciding. Odette had been in Mercy General for 3 days. She had called the ambulance herself on Friday evening when the tightness in her chest reached the threshold she had identified years ago as the threshold requiring professional intervention. She had filled out the admission paperwork in the emergency bay, had provided the insurance information from memory, had been settled into room 412 by 10 that evening. She had called Todd on Saturday morning after the diagnosis was confirmed and the treatment plan was established, and there was nothing left to arrange. She was accustomed to calling him after things were arranged. The room was a single clean adequate in the way of hospital rooms that had been designed for function rather than comfort, and that a certain kind of patient maid ordered through the precision of what they placed in them. The photo of Walter was on the nightstand Walter at the fishing pier in 1989 with the expression he always had when he was happy and not performing it. Her reading glasses were folded beside it. The Dell laptop was in the nightstand drawer where it had been since Friday evening when she packed her overnight bag with the methodical attention she gave to packing, taking what was needed and nothing else. Todd put the takeaway coffee on the nightstand beside Walter's photo. He did not open it for her. He talked about the cruise. He had booked it in January, he said. 8 days Caribbean itinerary, the kind of thing Clara had been wanting to do since they started seeing each other. He had almost canceled when the hospital called, he said. He had actually picked up the phone to call the travel company. But Clara had said that Odette had nurses, that she didn't need him sitting there 24 hours a day, that the doctors had everything under control. He said, "Clara said you'd want me to go." Odette looked at her son. 49 years old, twice divorced, currently employed as a regional sales manager at a level that was stable rather than distinguished. A man who had moved through his adult life with the particular ease of someone who had never been required to manage the logistics of his own existence, because the logistics had always been managed for him first by Walter and then after Walter by Odette. She said, "Go, Todd. I'll be fine." He looked at his phone. He looked at the wall. He looked at his watch. 11 minutes after he had sat down, he stood up. He bent and pressed his lips briefly to her forehead, the gesture of a son performing the actions of a son without inhabiting them fully. He said, "You're always fine, Mom. I'll call when I'm back." He walked to the door. His phone was at his ear before the door finished closing. Odette watched the door. She looked at the takeaway coffee on the nightstand, the lid still on the coffee, cooling inside it toward room temperature. She did not reach for it. She sat for 30 seconds in the particular quiet of a room after someone has left it, the quality of air that a presence creates and an absence removes, and she understood something that she had been approaching for a long time and had now arrived at completely, which was that Todd had not seen her in a very long time and would not begin seeing her now, and that the 20 years she had spent building a financial safety net around him had been built around a man who had never once looked at what was holding him up. She reached into the nightstand drawer. She took out the Dell laptop. She opened it. The screen lit with the login page she had been using since the hospital's Wi-Fi credentials were given to her on Friday evening. She typed her password, the same password she had used for every banking system since 1998, the password that Todd did not know existed because Todd had never needed to know her passwords. She had always handled the passwords. The desktop loaded. She opened the Excel file. It was 3 years old, updated most recently 4 weeks ago. The title at the top of the first sheet read in the plain descriptive style she used for all working documents, Assets, Associated Parties, Todd. 14 rows, 2 joint checking accounts, 1 joint savings account, 4 investment accounts with Todd listed as beneficiary, 3 life insurance policies with Todd as the named recipient, 2 properties with Todd's name on the ownership documents, 1 will with Todd as primary heir, 1 power of attorney currently held by Todd. Odette looked at the list. She had created each item in it across 20 years of deliberate, methodical inclusion, each one a decision she had made with full awareness of what she was doing, building the architecture of financial protection around her son, the way she had built everything else in her professional life with precision and without announcement. She picked up her phone. She called Grant Hollis. Grant answered on the second ring, which was how Grant always answered when Odette called, because in 31 years of professional relationship, he had learned that Odette Marlowe did not call without a reason that warranted answering on the second ring. She said, "Grant, I need you to prepare documents. Not a few things. All of it." Grant said, "Todd." She said, "All of it. Every account. Everything with his name on it. I want it completed before next Wednesday." Grant was quiet for a moment. He said, "Where are you?" She said, "The hospital. Room 412. I have time." She ended the call. She looked at the Excel file. Row 1, joint checking account. U.S. bank account ending 2847. Balance $87,400. Todd had full withdrawal rights. She right-clicked. The menu appeared. She selected Remove Joint Account Holder. The confirmation screen appeared. She clicked Confirm. Row 1 was done. 13 rows remaining. She opened her notebook to a fresh page. She wrote Monday 9:42 a.m., account 1 of 14. Beginning. She had been in the hospital 3 days before Todd visited. He had stayed 11 minutes. When he left, she did not cry. She opened the laptop and began removing his name from the financial life she had built, one account at a time in the hospital room where no one knew what she was doing except the man in the photograph on the nightstand. She had always been fine. That she had finally understood was exactly the problem. Delia Rawlings checked room 412 at 2:17 a.m. She expected what she usually found at this hour, which was a patient in the particular stillness of sleep, assisted by medication, the stillness that told her the body was doing what it needed to do. What she found instead was Odette Marlowe sitting straight against the pillows, reading glasses on the Dell laptop open on the bed tray, the screen lighting her face in the dark room, the keyboard making its quiet and steady sound. Delia stood in the doorway for a moment. She said, "Mrs. Marlowe, you should be sleeping." Odette looked up over her glasses with the look of a woman who had been interrupted during work and was assessing the interruption. She said, "I have something to finish. It won't take long." Delia came in. She checked the IV line, the blood pressure cuff, the temperature reading on the monitor, the observations a nurse made after 22 years of night rounds with the efficiency of someone whose assessment had become so practiced it required no conscious allocation of attention. Everything was within the acceptable range. The patient was medically stable. The patient was also awake at 2 a.m, working on a laptop in a hospital bed, which was outside the acceptable range in a different category. She was preparing to leave when Odette said, "How long have you worked here?" Delia said 22 years. Odette said 22 years. She said it with the weight of someone who understood what 22 years in a single institution meant, the accumulation of knowledge that came from that kind of duration. She said, "Have you seen many people left alone here?" Delia stopped. She did not turn around immediately. She said, "More than you'd think." She turned. She looked at Odette at the laptop screen, at the woman in the hospital bed at 2 in the morning with needle marks on her hands and reading glasses on her nose, and the particular expression of someone doing necessary work. She said, "What are you working on up there?" Odette considered for a moment. Then she turned the laptop screen so Delia could see it, not to perform the showing, not to explain or justify or seek permission. She turned it because she had been in this room alone for 3 days, and there was something clarifying about being seen by someone who would understand without requiring a lengthy account of how it had arrived at this point. The Excel file, 14 rows. The first column, TIOD. The second column, 4 rows already marked. Remove the text in the cells clean and final, the way completed items looked in a well-maintained spreadsheet. Delia looked at the screen for a moment. She said, "That's your son." Odette said yes. Delia said, "Where is he?" Odette said, "On a plane to the Caribbean, 8-day cruise." The room was quiet in the way of a room at 2 in the morning in a hospital, the particular quiet of a building that is functioning at reduced capacity. The distant sounds of the institution doing what it did at this hour, which was keep people alive with the minimum necessary noise. 2 women in that quiet one sitting in a hospital bed, and one standing beside it, and between them the particular understanding that did not require further explanation, the understanding of women who have spent enough years managing things that the sight of another woman managing things at 2 in the morning required no commentary. Delia said, "I'll bring you an extra blanket. It's a long night." Odette said, "Thank you." At 3:30, Delia came back. She brought a blanket from the staff room and a cup of tea she had made from the staff kitchen, not the institutional tea from the ward trolley, but the proper tea from the box she kept in her locker, and she set both on the nightstand beside Walter's photograph and the untouched takeaway coffee Todd had left that morning. Odette had reached row 6. The third investment account beneficiary designation removed confirmation email already in her inbox. Delia sat down in the chair beside the bed. It was the same chair Todd had sat in for 11 minutes, the same position, the same distance from the bed, the same angle to the window that showed the parking lot lights in the dark outside. She did not say anything. She drank her tea. Odette continued typing. The 2 of them remained that way in the room, one working and one present, and the night moved around them the way hospital nights moved in the small sounds of the building doing its overnight work. At 5 o'clock, Delia's shift was ending. She stood and gathered her things and paused at the door. She said, "Mrs. Marlowe, I'm back tonight. If you need anything before then, call the duty nurse. They won't ask questions." Odette looked up. She said, "What is your full name?" Delia said, "Delia Rawlings." Odette said, "Thank you, Delia Rawlings." Tuesday morning brought Dr. Helena Cross for the regular assessment, the overnight readings reviewed. The chest sounds listened to with the stethoscope that Dr. Cross had carried for 26 years. The lungs were improving. The treatment was working. She noted the laptop on the bed tray. She said, "Working, Mrs. Marlowe." Odette said, "Some paperwork." Dr. Cross said, "What kind of paperwork is urgent enough to do from a hospital bed?" Odette closed the laptop. She looked at the doctor directly, the look of a woman who had spent 37 years looking at people across desks and had developed the capacity to deliver information without softening it past the point of accuracy. She said, "Revising my will." Dr. Cross looked at her for a moment. She had been a doctor for 26 years. She knew when not to ask. She completed the assessment and left. Tuesday noon, 8 rows marked removed, 6 remaining. Odette looked at Walter's photograph on the nightstand, Walter at the fishing pier, with the expression of a man who was happy and not performing it. She said, "Am I doing the right thing, Walter?" The photograph did not answer, but she knew the answer. Walter had told her in 2015, 2 years before he died, when Todd came to them after his second divorce with a loan request he would not repay. Walter had said, "Odette, stop building the net. The boy needs to stand." She had not listened. She had added his name to 2 more accounts the following year, continued the architecture of protection, continued believing that one day the accumulation of safety would teach him something about being safe. She had not listened then. She was listening now. The room was quiet. The monitor blinked its steady rhythm. The takeaway coffee was cold on the nightstand and would remain cold, because some things that arrive without consideration were best left exactly as they came. 6 rows remaining. She opened the laptop. She had not listened to Walter in 2015. She had kept building. She had kept adding his name to things, kept thinking that the day of understanding was approaching, and she simply needed to hold the net in place a little longer. Now she was in a hospital room alone, and she was finally hearing what Walter had said 7 years ago. Sometimes it took an empty room to hear the advice you had already been given. Grant arrived at 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning. He came through the door of room 412 with the leather briefcase he had carried since 1991 and the expression of a man who had been practicing law for 35 years and had developed through that duration the professional composure that meant his face did not perform reactions to things that were not his reactions to perform. He had heard stranger requests in smaller rooms. He sat down in the chair beside Odette's bed and set the briefcase on his knees and opened it. The same chair. Todd's 11 minutes. Delia's 3:30 a.m. Now Grant with the documents. He said, "I've prepared everything you requested, but I want to ask one more time. Are you certain?" Odette looked at him over her reading glasses. She said, "Grant, you have been my attorney for 29 years. Have you ever seen me do anything I wasn't certain about?" Grant said, "Never." She said, "Then let's begin." He opened the first folder. The Columbus apartment. Odette had bought it in 2016 after Todd's second divorce, when he came to her with the particular combination of devastation and expectation that she had learned over the years was Todd's characteristic mode of arriving at her door. She had said, "You just need somewhere to start over." She had bought the apartment and put both their names on the title and had not charged him rent in the 6 years since, because she had told herself that one day he would be on his feet, and it would not matter. He had not paid $1 in 6 years. It had not stopped mattering. Grant had prepared the quitclaim deed. Odette read it. She signed it. Her signature was what it had always been, the signature she had used on 37 years of banking documents, clear and unhurried, the signature of someone who signed things they had read and understood completely. The deed transferred full ownership to Odette Marlowe, sole holder. Todd would receive notification from the county recorder's office within 10 business days. The second folder, the lake house. The Marlowe family had spent summers at the lake house for 30 years, since Walter found it in 1994, and said, "Odette, this is where we will go when we need to remember what matters." She had put it into a trust in 2003, and had added Todd as co-trustee in 2010, thinking that shared stewardship of a place that held family memory was the kind of responsibility that taught something. She had added a clause to the trust that year as well, with the particular foresight of a banker who understood that documents needed to account for futures that had not yet arrived. The clause read, "The surviving trustee retains full authority to amend the trust structure." She had been the one who added that clause. She was the one using it now. Grant had prepared the amendment. Todd removed from the co-trustee position. Full control returned to Odette Marlowe, sole trustee. She read it. She signed it. The third folder was the thickest. The will. The existing document left 70% of the estate to Todd and 30% to a rotating selection of charitable organizations Odette had supported for 2 decades. She had written it in 2019 after Walter had been gone 2 years, in the particular state of mind of a woman arranging her affairs with the methodical attention she gave to all arrangements, building the architecture of what would remain when she did not. The new document was different. 5% to Todd. Grant had advised this precisely, and Odette had agreed precisely because 5% was the threshold below which a disinherited heir in the state of Ohio could contest a will on grounds of inadvertent omission. 5% was not inadvertent. 5% was deliberate, documented, and legally sound. 45% to the Walter Marlowe Nursing Scholarship Fund, which Odette had instructed Grant to establish in conjunction with the local community college nursing program. Named for the man in the photograph on the nightstand. 25% to Mercy General Hospital Respiratory Care Department, which seemed appropriate given that she was currently breathing in it. The remaining 25% to a discretionary trust whose beneficiary would be identified in a sealed addendum Grant would hold. She read the new will from the beginning to the end. She read it the way she read all documents, completely and without skipping. She signed it. The fourth folder, the power of attorney. Todd had held it since 2018, the year Odette had tripped on a patch of ice and spent 3 days in this same hospital with a fractured wrist, and had decided in the pragmatic way she decided things that someone should have the authority to act on her behalf if she became unable to act on her own. She had given it to Todd because he was her son, and because she had still, in 2018, believed that the architecture of responsibility she had built around him would eventually teach him to inhabit it. She revoked it now. The revocation of power of attorney was a single page. She signed it. The new POA named Grant Hollis as her agent for both financial and medical decisions. She said, "Grant, I trust you. You have never given me reason not to." Grant nodded. He did not say anything. He had been in this room for 2 hours and he had witnessed 4 signatures on 4 documents, and he had not offered commentary because commentary was not what Odette had called him for. She had called him because she needed a lawyer who would execute rather than evaluate, and that was what he had done. He gathered the folders. He said everything will be in effect within 5 to 7 business days. When Todd returns, his name will no longer appear on any document of legal significance. A pause. He said, "Would you like me to notify him?" Odette looked out the window. The parking lot, the Ohio April sky, the trees beginning what they did in April. She said, "No, let him find out himself." Grant said, "How will he find out?" She said, "He'll try to use something somewhere and it will be declined. That's the fastest way for him to understand." Grant left. The room was quiet. Tuesday afternoon, in a hospital room, the monitor steadied the IV, delivering what it delivered, the photograph of Walter, on the nightstand in the April light. Odette opened the laptop one last time. The Excel file, 14 rows. Every cell in the second column reading "removed." The work complete. The list closed the 20-year architecture of protection methodically and completely dismantled in the time it had taken her son to reach the Caribbean and back. She saved the file. She closed the laptop. She looked at Walter. She said, "It's done, Walter. I'm done." The room held this. She had completed in 3 days what she had built in 20 years. No call to Todd, no message, no signal of any kind. When his plane landed in Miami on Sunday, everything with his name on it would have a different name. He would not know until he tried to use something that was no longer his. The Caribbean Star was somewhere between the Bahamas and the Virgin Islands when Todd Marlowe ordered his second piña colada of the afternoon. He was in the deck chair he had claimed on the first day, the one with the optimal angle to the sun and the view of the water that looked exactly like the photos in the cruise brochure, and Clara was beside him with her sunglasses on and her phone up, scrolling through something, occasionally turning the screen to show him something worth looking at. The light was the particular gold of a Caribbean afternoon, the kind of light that made everything look like it had been arranged for a photograph. He took a photograph of the horizon. He posted it to Facebook. He typed, "Nothing beats a week at sea." Then he added the hashtags because Clara had explained that hashtags extended reach, and he had started thinking about reach since she started explaining things. He posted it. He watched the likes accumulate. 14 by the time he put the phone down. His mother had not liked the post. He did not think about this. At Mercy General Hospital Room 412, Odette was finishing the 4th signature of the morning with Grant Hollis seated in the chair beside her bed and the monitor blinking its steady rhythm behind the laptop screen. The power of attorney revocation. Her signature the same as it had always been. Todd put his phone face down on the deck chair and closed his eyes. On the 4th day, Clara got a message. A friend of hers had seen the Facebook posts and had also seen through a mutual connection that Todd's mother was in the hospital and had sent a message to Clara asking if everything was all right. Clara lowered her sunglasses and looked at Todd. She said, "Did you call your mom?" Todd said, "She's fine. She said so." Clara said, "But she's in the hospital." Todd said, "Pneumonia, not cancer." Clara looked at him for a moment with the expression of a woman who had decided whether to pursue something and had decided not to. She raised her sunglasses. She went back to her phone. She did not call Odette either. This was not cruelty. This was the accumulation of small decisions made by people who had been taught by the consistency of Odette's management of her own life that Odette did not need them to call. Friday evening was the formal dinner night. Todd wore the jacket he had brought for this specific occasion, and Clara wore the blue dress, and they stood in front of the stateroom mirror and took a photograph and posted it. And the photograph was good, the lighting flattering the two of them looking exactly like people who were having the vacation they had planned to have. 1,400 miles away, Odette was sitting in room 412 with the completed Excel file open on the laptop screen. 14 rows, 14 cells in the second column, every one of them removed. Same moment, different worlds, one thread between them thinning. Friday morning, Todd had tried to use the joint credit card to book a snorkeling excursion for Clara and himself, the one that departed from the ship at 8 and returned at noon with a buffet lunch included. The card was declined. He looked at the terminal. He looked at the cruise staff member behind the counter. He said, "Sorry, system error, probably." He used his personal Visa. The transaction went through. He took the tickets and put the joint card back in his wallet without further consideration because his experience of Odette's financial systems was that they worked, and when they didn't work, the reason was technical rather than intentional, because in his experience, nothing Odette built ever failed on purpose. He did not call to check. He did not think to call. At the hospital, Odette received Grant's email at 3:40 Friday afternoon. All filings submitted. Processing in progress, estimated completion Monday. She read it once. She set the phone on the nightstand beside Walter's photograph. She looked out the window at the Ohio April sky, the particular blue of a Midwestern spring afternoon. On the ship, Todd and Clara danced on the upper deck after the formal dinner, the Caribbean night around them, the water dark and enormous in all directions, the music, the kind of music that was designed for exactly this setting and was doing its job. He was not thinking about his mother. He was not performing the not thinking. It was simply not present in the available space of his attention, which was occupied by Clara and the music and the particular pleasure of being in a place that looked like a good time and was delivering on that premise. Each song that played another account finalized in a system he did not know he had ever been part of. On the last day in the duty-free shop near the gangway where the ship docked in Nassau for the final port day, Todd found the gift section. He moved through it with the attention of a man performing the task of buying a gift, which was different from the attention of a man who knew what the person wanted. He considered a bottle of rum and set it down because Odette did not drink rum. He considered a small ceramic dish and set it down because he was not certain about ceramics. He found the scarves, the silk ones printed with tropical flowers in the colors that cruise ship gift shops had determined were appropriate to the location, and he selected one in pink and green. He held it up for Clara. He said, "My mom likes this kind of thing." Clara said, "It's pretty." He put it in his basket. $24. He paid with the personal Visa. The plane landed in Miami on Sunday at 4:30 in the afternoon. Todd turned his phone on while the plane was still taxiing and watched the notifications arrive, the accumulated 8 days of social media activity and work emails and the ordinary traffic of a connected life temporarily paused. No messages from his mother. No missed calls from Mercy General. He looked at the screen and thought what he had thought when he left. She's fine. She said so. She's always fine. He did not know that the silence on his phone was not the silence of someone who was fine and had nothing to report. It was the silence of someone who had said everything that needed to be said in 4 signatures on 4 documents in 14 confirmed removals in an Excel file and a phone call to a lawyer on Monday morning from a hospital bed. Odette had not called because she had nothing left to say to him in words. He had been on the ship for 8 days and had not called once. He had bought her a $24 scarf. He had danced under the Caribbean moon while his name was removed from the 14th account. It was not malice. That was the more frightening truth. It was the complete and habitual thoughtlessness of a man who had never been required to think about consequences, because the woman who bore the consequences had always managed them before he arrived. He had a scarf in his carry-on bag and a tan he had earned on someone else's time. Tomorrow he would go to the hospital. He thought everything would be the same as when he left. Todd came through the door of room 412 at 10:30 on Monday morning. He came in the way he had come in 9 days ago, with the forward momentum of a man arriving somewhere he expected to find things as he had left them, but with the additional quality of someone returning from a vacation, the particular lightness of a person whose body has been in the sun for 8 days and is still carrying the warmth of it. His skin was a shade darker than it had been. He was smiling. He said, "Mom, you look better." He set the bag on the edge of the bed, the silk scarf folded in its tissue paper, the gift shop bag with the cruise line logo on the side. He said, "I got you something in the Bahamas." Odette looked at the bag. She looked at her son. She did not reach for the bag. She said, "Sit down, Todd." He sat in the chair, the same chair. He settled into it with the ease of a man who did not register the history of the chairs he sat in, and he began to talk. He talked about the cruise, the way he had talked about things his entire life, with the energy of someone who had experienced something and wanted to share the experience, the weather and the food, and the evening shows and the snorkeling, and a story about a man at their dining table who had told the same joke 3 nights in a row. He talked about Clara. He said Clara had loved the formal dinner night. Odette listened. She let him finish. Then she said, "Did you receive any calls from the bank while you were away?" Todd stopped. He said, "The bank number? Why?" Odette said, "Check your account." He looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone who has been given an instruction that seems unrelated to the conversation they thought they were having, and then he took out his phone and opened the banking application. He entered his password. The account list loaded. He looked at it. He scrolled. He looked at it again. The joint checking account, U.S. Bank. The account ending in 2847 with the balance of $87,400 that had been on his account list for 6 years was not there. His personal checking account was there. His personal savings account was there. The joint account was not. Point. He said, "Must be an app glitch." He closed the application and reopened it. The same list. He said, "Let me call the bank." He called the number on the back of his card and put it on speaker because the room was quiet, and he did not think to lower his voice, and the customer service representative answered after 3 minutes of hold music and asked how she could help. Todd gave his name and his account number and explained that a joint account seemed to be missing from his profile. The representative was quiet for a moment while she looked at her screen. She said, "Mr. Marlowe, the joint checking account ending in 2847 was converted to a sole account under the name Odette Marlowe on Tuesday of last week. Your access has been removed." Todd said, "Who did that?" She said, "The account holder, Mrs. Odette Marlowe. All documentation is in order." Todd ended the call. He looked at his mother. The confusion on his face was genuine. It was not the confusion of a man performing surprise, but the confusion of a man whose understanding of a fundamental architecture has been removed without warning the confusion of someone who has just been informed that the floor he was standing on has changed material. He said, "What did you do?" Odette reached for the folder on the bed tray. The same folder Grant had assembled in this room on Wednesday morning, the copies she had kept for this conversation, organized in the sequence she intended to present them. She opened it. She took out the first document and placed it on the bed tray in front of Todd. The quitclaim deed, the Columbus apartment. His name on the original ownership document, her name on the transfer, her signature at the bottom, dated last Wednesday. She did not explain it. She placed the second document, the trust amendment, the lake house. Todd's name removed from the co-trustee position. Her signature. Same date. She placed the third document, the new will. He read the summary page. He read the distribution 5%. He read the Walter Marlowe Nursing Scholarship Fund. He read the Mercy General Bequest. She placed the fourth document, the revocation of power of attorney. Todd's name as the revoked agent. Grant Hollis as the named successor. Her signature and Grant's signature witnesses and notarization complete. 4 documents on the bed tray. She had not said a word while she placed them. She did not need to. The documents said what they said in the language they had been written in, which was the language of finality. Todd looked at the documents. He looked at them. the way a person looks at things when their brain is processing faster than their expression can keep up with moving through the stages of comprehension in the visible sequence of a man whose face has not yet learned to hide what his mind is doing. First, the not understanding reading the words and not assembling them. Then, the assembling the moment the words became the thing they described. Then, something that was not quite fear, but was in the same family, the physical response of a person encountering the removal of something they had not known they were depending on. He said, "You took your name off everything." He stopped. He said, "You took my name off everything." Odette said 14 items in 7 days. He said, "Mom, you can't, this isn't." She said, "It's legal." Grant reviewed every document. Everything was executed correctly. She said, "I didn't do this because I'm angry." He said, "Then why?" She said, "I did it because I've been in this hospital for 9 days. And you were here for 11 minutes. She said it the way she said things that were expressed in numbers, which was plainly because the numbers were the point, because the numbers were what she had, instead of the words that would have been too large to say and too easy to argue with. 9 days, 11 minutes. She had been a banker for 37 years, and she had learned that the data was harder to dispute than the feeling. Todd stood up. Not to leave. He stood because he did not know what to do with his body, and standing was the option his body chose. And he stood there in front of his mother's bed, with the folder in his hands and the cruise tan still on his face, and the silk scarf still in the bag on the edge of the mattress unopened. He said, "I can fix this. I'll call Grant. Odette said, "Fix what, Todd?" She said it quietly, the quiet of a woman who had already cried what needed crying in the days before this conversation and had arrived at the other side of it, where what remained was not anger, but clarity. She said, "You can't fix 9 days. You can't fix 11 minutes. You can't fix the fact that you didn't call once in 8 days. She looked at him. She said, "I don't want you to fix it. I want you to understand it." He stood in front of her with the folder in his hands, and the afternoon light came through the hospital window and fell across the bed tray, where 4 documents explained 20 years of building and 7 days of taking apart, and the monitor behind her blinked its steady rhythm, and the untouched bag with the $24 scarf sat on the edge of the mattress between them. Todd did not leave. He stood in front of his mother's bed with the folder in his hands and the cruise tan on his face, and for the first time in the conversation, possibly for the first time in considerably longer than that, he did not have a script. There was no prepared response for this situation because he had never prepared for this situation because some part of him had never considered it a situation that required preparation. His mother managed things. That was what his mother did. He had understood this as a fact about her the way he understood facts about weather as a condition of the environment, rather than as a choice she was making. He sat down, not because he decided to sit, but because his legs made the decision and the rest of him followed, and he sat in the chair and put the folder on the bed beside him and opened it. He read the documents again. Slower this time. The quitclaim deed first. The Columbus apartment, the place he had lived for 6 years without paying rent, where he had put his furniture and his books, and the framed photographs from his second marriage that he had not taken down, because taking them down required making a decision about them. His name on the original ownership line removed, her name sole. He read the date and calculated she had signed this the day after he flew to Miami, the trust amendment. He turned to the property description and found the lake house. He had been 10 years old the summer his father built the dock. He had been 12 the summer he caught his first fish off that dock, and Walter had taken a photograph and kept it on the kitchen wall of that house until he died, and Odette had kept it thereafter. He had not been to the lake house in 3 years. He had told himself he would go next summer, and next summer had not come. He read the new will, 5%. He read the Walter Marlowe Nursing Scholarship Fund. He read the Mercy General bequest the Respiratory Care Department. He looked at the monitor behind his mother and understood what the Respiratory Care Department meant in this specific room on this specific day. He read the power of attorney revocation. His name revoked. Grant Hollis' successor. He closed the folder. He said, "I didn't know you had all of this." Odette said, "I know you didn't. That's part of the problem." He said, I never asked. She said, no, you never asked. You also never said thank you. You just used what was there. A pause. She said, I'm not angry at you for using it. I'm the one who built it. I put it there for you to use. She looked at him with the expression she had been wearing since he walked in, the expression of a woman who had completed something and was now in the quieter space on the other side of it. But I'm angry that you never saw it, that you've been living inside something I built for 20 years and you never once looked at the walls. Todd said nothing. Odette said, you've been living like a child, Todd, and I let you because it was easier than watching you struggle. She said that was my mistake, not yours. He looked at the floor. He said, I'm sorry. He said it the way people said it when they meant it and did not know how to make it adequate, which was quietly and without the elaboration that turns apologies into performances. Odette said, I know you are. She said, but I'm sorry doesn't put me back in the hospital alone for 9 days with you on a cruise ship. I'm sorry doesn't answer a phone. She said it without sharpness because the sharpness had already been spent in the 7 days of methodical work, in the 4 signatures and the 14 confirmed removals. What remained was the plain truth, stated plainly. Todd said, what do I do now? Odette said what adults do. You find work, you rent an apartment, you pay for it yourself. He said, that's it. She said, that's it. That's how I lived for 37 years before you were born. He sat with this. Then he stood. He picked up the folder. He did not throw it. He did not crumple it or leave it on the bed. He folded it shut and held it under his arm with the particular care of someone who has understood that what they are holding is important, even if the importance is uncomfortable. He said, I'm going to fix this. Not the money, not the accounts. He stopped. He said, I don't know how, but I'm going to figure it out. Odette looked at her son. She said, that's the first time you've said something like that without me telling you what the answer was. A long pause. She said, take the folder. Read it again when you're ready. He reached into his jacket pocket. He took out the silk scarf from the duty-free shop in Nassau, still folded still in the tissue paper from the gift bag, and he set it on the nightstand beside Walter's photograph. He did not hand it to her. He set it down the way a person sets something down when they are not sure of its reception, but want it to be there regardless. He said, I got this for you. Odette looked at the scarf. She looked at Walter in the photograph, Walter at the pier with the expression of a man who was happy and not performing it. She looked at Todd. She said, thank you. Her voice was different on those 2 words than it had been on anything else she had said that morning. Not warm exactly, not forgiving exactly, but something that acknowledged that the scarf was there, and he had put it there, and that was a thing he had done, which was different from a thing he had not done. Todd walked to the door. He paused. He did not turn around. He went out. The door closed. Odette sat in the room alone. The monitor blinked. The afternoon light moved across the bed tray where 4 documents had been laid down and were now gone. The scarf lay on the nightstand beside Walter, the tropical flowers printed on the cheap silk catching the light. She reached out and touched it. She did not put it on. She looked at Walter. She said, will he be all right, Walter? The photograph did not answer. She said, I don't know either, but at least now he'll have to figure it out himself. For the first time in 20 years, she did not already know the answer to that question. For the first time in 20 years, that felt like the correct situation. Delia came into room 412 at 10 o'clock Monday evening. She came through the door with the particular quality of a night nurse who has been doing this for 22 years, the economy of movement that belonged to someone whose body had learned to be present without disturbing. And she saw 2 things simultaneously. The silk scarf on the nightstand beside Walter's photograph new since this morning, and Odette's face, which was different from how it had been at 2 a.m. a week ago, and different from how it had been every evening since. Not more tired, lighter. Delia had been a nurse long enough to know the difference between the face of a person who had been through something and the face of a person who had set something down. Odette's face was the second kind. She checked the IV. She checked the blood pressure. She read the monitor numbers and noted them, and they were better measurably than they had been the previous week, the numbers of a body that was being asked to do less carrying. She said, "Did you sleep last night?" Odette said 6 hours. First time this week. Delia said, "Good." She sat down in the chair beside the bed. The same chair, the same position. No laptop open on the bed tray this time, no Excel file, no columns being filled. Odette told her, "Not everything. Enough." Todd had come that morning with his cruise tan and the gift bag. She had shown him the folder. He had called the bank on speakerphone and heard the words from a stranger's voice. She had placed 4 documents on the bed tray without saying anything. He had read them. He had said he was sorry. She said, "I didn't forgive him, but I listened." Delia sat with this for a moment. She said, 22 years here, I've seen 3 kinds of families. The first kind, they're here every day. They know the nurses by name. They bring food. They ask questions. The second kind, they never come. And the third kind, she paused. She said they come when there's something to sign. Odette looked at her. She said Todd is the third kind. Delia said maybe, but today he came when there was nothing to sign. That's something different. The room held this. Odette said, "Do you think I did the right thing with all of it?" Delia was quiet for a moment that had thinking in it rather than hesitation, the pause of someone who takes questions seriously. She said, "I don't know what's right in a family. I only know what's right in a hospital. And as a nurse, I can tell you this, you've been breathing better since that folder left this room." Odette looked at the monitor behind her, the steady green line of a heart doing what it was supposed to do. She reached for the laptop, not to open the Excel file, which was saved and closed and had been finished since Wednesday. She opened a different file created this morning and turned the screen toward Delia, the same way she had turned it the first night, the same gesture, the same trust that had made her turn it then. The screen showed a document header, Walter Marlowe Nursing Scholarship Fund Proposal Draft. Delia read, "Full scholarships for final year nursing students. Priority given to those working night shifts during their clinical placements. Those who, as the proposal language stated, remain when others have gone home." Delia looked at the screen for a long time. She looked at Odette. For the first time in 22 years of night shifts in this hospital, she did not have immediate words for what she was experiencing, which was a condition so unusual in a woman who had managed every kind of human moment that its arrival was itself significant. "She said you named it after your husband." Odette said Walter used to say nursing is the most important profession in a hospital. Doctors come and go, nurses stay. She looked at Delia. "She said you stayed. Twice at 2:17 in the morning and again at 3:30. She said that is worth more than anything I ever built for Todd." They talked for a while after that, about smaller things, the things that came after the large things had been said. Odette said she was thinking about traveling when she got out, not a cruise, but the kind of traveling she had always wanted to do, train routes through small Midwestern towns. She had never visited the places that appeared in the window of a train car and were gone before you could decide if you wanted to stop. Delia said she had been thinking about going back to school for the advanced nursing degree she had deferred 20 years ago, when life had made deferral seem practical. These were the things that people said to each other when they were genuinely present. Near the end of the shift, Delia stood. Odette said, "Mrs. Delia, there's something I want you to know." Delia paused. Odette said, "Your name is on the list." Delia said, "What list?" Odette said, "The list of people who did something. Not the financial list. My list." She said it the way she said things that were simply true, plainly and without elaboration, the way she had said things for 37 years of professional life, with the precision of someone who understood that the plainest statement was usually the most accurate one. Delia stood at the door. She looked at Odette in the hospital bed with the monitor behind her and Walter's photograph on the nightstand and the silk scarf folded beside it, and she said, "Mrs. Marlowe." She said, "In 22 years, that is the best thing anyone has ever said to me on a night shift." She went out. The door closed gently, the closing of someone who knew how to leave a room without disturbing what was in it. Odette looked at the laptop screen, the scholarship proposal still open, the cursor blinking after the last line she had written, waiting for the next thing she would build. Friday morning. 14 days after Odette Marlowe had called an ambulance and given the dispatcher her address and her insurance information and her medical history, in calm sequence, room 412 was being vacated. Dr. Cross signed the discharge papers at 8:15 with the expression of a doctor who had watched this particular patient work on a laptop through 2 weeks of pneumonia treatment and had formed her own conclusions about what had been treated in this room, which was more than one thing. Delia had switched shifts. She was there when Odette put on her gray sweater for the first time in 14 days. The sweater she had packed and the overnight bag she had packed with the methodical attention she gave to packing and the quality of the morning in room 412 was different from every previous morning in room 412, which was the quality of a room that has served its purpose and is ready to return to being a room. Odette folded her things into the small bag. Walter's photograph wrapped in the nightgown she no longer needed. The Dell laptop closed its work, complete its battery fully charged from the last charge she had given it the previous evening. The printed Excel file, one copy folded once and placed in the outside pocket of the bag where she could reach it. The silk scarf Todd had left on the nightstand. She picked it up. She folded it carefully along lines that would not crease the fabric the way she folded things that were worth keeping and placed it in the bag. Her phone buzzed. She read the message from Todd. Found extra work, night shift, starting Monday. She looked at the screen for a moment in the way she looked at financial data that required assessment before response. She typed, "Good. I'm being discharged today." The response came faster than any response had come in the 9 days he was on the Caribbean Star. "Come pick you up." She thought for 3 seconds. She typed, "Not necessary. I have someone." She put the phone in her pocket. Grant Hollis was in the hospital lobby when Odette came through the discharge doors, wearing the gray sweater and carrying the small bag, and he stood when he saw her with the expression of a man who had known this woman for 29 years and was seeing something in her face that he was used to seeing in the faces of people who have resolved something that needed resolving. He said, "Mrs. Marlowe, you look different." She said, "I slept properly for the first time in years." He said, "I wasn't talking about sleep." Delia walked with her to the hospital entrance. They came out through the sliding doors into the April morning, the first outdoor air Odette had breathed in 14 days, the Ohio April that was doing what Ohio April did, which was deliver spring in the incremental and genuine way of a climate that had earned its seasons. Delia said, "Do you need anything before you go?" Odette stood in the morning light outside Mercy General and looked at the woman who had brought her a blanket and a cup of tea at 3:30 in the morning and had sat in the chair beside her bed without asking questions. She said, "You've already given me what I needed. You stayed." 2:17 in the morning. Delia said, "That's my job." Odette said, "Your job is the IV and the blood pressure." Staying was a choice. Delia looked at her. They exchanged information the way people exchanged information when they intended to use it specifically, and with the understanding that the exchange was a commitment rather than a formality. Odette said the scholarship fund launch was in September, and she wanted Delia there. Delia said she would be there. These were statements, not pleasantries. The car ride was quiet in the good way of rides between two people who did not need to fill the silence. Grant handed her the final folder as they pulled out of the hospital lot. Thinner than the folder he had brought to the hospital last week, but organized with the completeness of documents that had been processed and confirmed and were now what they were intended to be. Not removal documents anymore, confirmation documents, confirming that Odette Marlowe, 74 years old, widow, retired vice president of commercial banking, was the sole controller of everything she had built and everything she had earned and everything Walter had left her to grow. She held the folder. She opened her bag with her other hand and took out the printed Excel file. 14 rows, 14 cells in the removed column. She had added a 15th row this morning in room 412 before she folded the page in the handwriting she had used for 37 years of working documents, deliberate and clear. Row 15, Walter Marlowe Nursing Scholarship Fund. Column 2. She folded the page. She put it back in the bag. She looked out the window at Ohio in April, the trees doing what trees did when winter finally permitted, and the hospital receded in the passenger side mirror into the ordinary size of a building rather than the entire world. She thought, Walter, it's done. Now I'm going to travel, real travel, train travel, towns I've never seen. She thought it the way she had said most things in the past 14 days, plainly and without elaboration, because the plain thing was always the accurate thing. She had spent 20 years building a safety net for a person who had never looked down to see it. She had spent 7 days taking it apart one row at a time in a hospital room where no one knew what she was doing. She had spent 14 days total and come out with a nursing scholarship fund and a changed document and a first line in a new ledger that said added instead of removed. Todd would be all right, or he would not. That was no longer her accounting to manage. For the first time in 49 years, the books she kept were only her own.